I had been covering my parents' bills for years without a second thought. Then, one day, everything changed when I lost my job and reached out for help. My father simply sighed and said, "We can't support you. You're an adult." So, I found a new job and stopped sending them money. That's when the calls began. For a decade, I had never questioned a single request from them. I never hesitated to pull out my credit card or log into my banking app when they called with yet another unexpected expense that somehow needed immediate attention. It all started small, just a little help with groceries when they claimed money was tight, then a bit toward their electricity bill when late fees piled up. Before I knew it, I was shouldering almost all their financial responsibilities without ever stopping to ask why. Rent, utilities, car repairs, medical bills, anything they needed, I provided. After all, that's what a good son does, right? It wasn't as if I was swimming in money or living a lavish lifestyle where cash flowed freely. No, I worked hard, putting in long hours and taking on overtime whenever I could. I skipped vacations and rarely treated myself to anything nice because, in the back of my mind, I felt a sense of duty. My parents had raised me, supported me through college, and given me a roof over my head when I was younger. So, I told myself I owed them. And for 10 years, I paid. Then, one random Thursday afternoon, my entire world shifted with a single email. "We regret to inform you that due to company downsizing, your position has been eliminated effective immediately." Just like that, after years of loyal service, I was unemployed. It didn't even feel real as I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, hoping they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Panic set in quickly. My rent was due in 2 weeks, and my emergency savings weren't as robust as I had always promised myself they would be. The thought of going from a stable income to nothing overnight made my chest tighten with anxiety. But I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I wasn't alone. My parents, whom I had never failed, would surely be willing to help me just this once, just for a little while. That night, I called my dad, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to let the sheer terror seep into my words. "Hey Dad," I said, forcing a little laugh, "I got some bad news today. I lost my job." I explained that I could really use some help covering rent for a couple of months while I figured things out. There was silence on the other end, a long, heavy pause that made my stomach twist. Then he sighed, in that way he always did when I was a child asking for something unreasonable, like ice cream before dinner. "Ryan, we can't support you," he said, his tone cool and detached, as if he were talking to a stranger. "You're an adult. You'll figure it out." I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen as if it could somehow clarify what I had just heard. I had expected concern, maybe a little hesitation, but this was something else entirely. "What?" I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "You'll figure it out," he repeated, this time with a hint of impatience, as if he were scolding me for even asking. "We're not in a position to help you." Not in a position? I had spent 10 years making sure they never had to worry about bills, stress over rent, or scramble to cover emergencies. I had given up vacations, nice things, and financial security to ensure they were always comfortable. And now, the first time I needed them, they couldn't be bothered. I wanted to argue, to remind him of every dollar I had funneled into their lives without a second thought. But in that moment, I realized something that made my blood run cold: he didn't care. My father wasn't apologetic, wasn't sad, wasn't even grateful for everything I had done over the years. To him, this was just the natural order of things. I was the provider, and he was the recipient. The moment I stopped being useful? Well, that wasn't his problem. I ended the call without another word, my hands shaking as I set my phone down on the kitchen table. It felt like something inside me had snapped, like a decade of blind loyalty had suddenly shattered into tiny, irreparable pieces. That night, I made a decision, one that should have been obvious years ago but had somehow never crossed my mind. No more money. Not a single cent. Not another bill, not another grocery run, not another emergency payment for some serious debt that never seemed to go away. I was done. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating on my. I nearly laughed at the audacity of it all. Everything they had done for me? I was the one who had taken care of them for a decade. But in their eyes, my role had always been clear. I was the provider, and they were the takers. The moment I stopped, I wasn't their son anymore, I was the enemy. By the end of the day, they had called my work phone twice, my personal phone over 40 times, and left enough voicemails to fill my inbox. I finally snapped and blocked them both. The silence was immediate. For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't have to check my bank account in fear of another withdrawal. I didn't have to hold my breath every time my phone rang. I didn't have to shoulder their burdens while they lived comfortably on my dime. That night, I slept better than I had in months. But that peace didn't last. The next morning, I walked into work and was immediately pulled aside by my manager. "Ryan, we got a call from your father this morning," she said, looking at me with concern. "He was in a panic, saying it was an emergency and he couldn't get a hold of you. We didn't know what was going on, so we transferred him to your line." My stomach dropped. She handed me a slip of paper with the company voicemail number scribbled on it. Hands shaking, I dialed in, listening as my father's voice, calm but laced with something sinister, poured through the speaker. "Ryan, I know why you're doing this, but you don't know the whole story." I hung up, staring at the phone in my hand. He wasn't done with me yet. The first few days after I blocked their numbers felt like freedom wrapped in an unfamiliar silence, a kind of peace I hadn't experienced in years, yet still tinged with an underlying unease that refused to let me fully relax. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart jumped. My fingers hesitated before checking, half expecting them to find a new way to reach me. But the calls had finally stopped. For the first time in a decade, I could breathe without feeling like someone was reaching into my wallet at the same time. Still, my father's last words echoed in my mind, digging in like a splinter I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I wanted to. "You don't know the whole story." That single phrase knotted me, turning over in my head at night, making me wonder if maybe, just maybe, I had misunderstood something. But then the anger would return just as quickly, reminding me that I had spent 10 years unquestioningly throwing money into a pit I assumed was bottomless need, only to be discarded the moment I needed help myself. But what if it hadn't been need at all? The thought came suddenly, sharp and insistent, and before I could talk myself out of it, I found myself sitting at my desk, laptop open, fingers hesitating over the keyboard as a familiar creeping unease settled over me. I had never, not once, questioned where the money went after I sent it. I had never checked their bank statements, never asked for receipts, never even thought to look because I had trusted them. I had trusted them. And now that trust felt like the biggest mistake of my life. I took a deep breath, logged into my bank account, and started scrolling through years of transactions, my stomach twisting as I saw just how much money had left my hands and gone straight into theirs. Thousands. Tens of thousands. So many payments labeled as help or emergency. So many automatic transfers I had barely registered at the time because I had convinced myself it was the right thing to do. But something felt wrong. I knew what struggling looked like. I had lived paycheck to paycheck before, learned how to stretch every dollar, had skipped meals to make sure bills got paid. And yet, when I pulled up their bank records I had access to because at one point they had made me a secondary on their account for convenience, I didn't see struggle. I didn't see desperation. I saw luxury. Spa charges, fine dining, high-end shopping sprees, transactions at boutique hotels, even payments to a personal trainer. I scrolled faster, my hands trembling as I watched the truth unravel in front of me. Years of blind generosity laid bare, numbers that told a story far different from the one they had always fed me. They hadn't been scraping by, they had been living comfortably, even extravagantly, off my money. I felt physically sick. All those times I had skipped vacations, ignored my own needs, told myself that family comes first, they had been spending my hard-earned money on facials and five-star restaurants while I exhausted myself trying to keep them afloat. It wasn't even just the necessities I had been paying for, it was their entire lifestyle, a lifestyle the transfers were regular and consistent, always in increments that seemed small enough not to raise alarms. But over time, they added up to tens of thousands of dollars. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. This was deliberate, calculated, and not an accident. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, barely remembering the drive to my parents' house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my blood was a storm in my veins, an unrelenting current of fury that burned away any last traces of guilt or hesitation. They had used me. They had lied to me. And now, they were going to answer for it. My father opened the door, a carefully crafted expression of surprise already settling on his face, his lips parting as if he had planned some greeting, some attempt at false warmth to ease the tension between us. But I didn't give him the chance. "Where's Mom?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. He hesitated for a fraction of a second too long, his eyes flickering with something unreadable before he stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room where my mother sat, flipping through a newspaper as if her world hadn't just come crashing down. The moment she looked up and saw me, something in her expression shifted, something cautious, something aware. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice calm and controlled, the voice of a woman who had spent her entire life lying without ever getting caught. I didn't sit down. I didn't ease into it. I just pulled out my phone, opened the bank records, and shoved the screen toward her, the name Stephen Carter highlighted for emphasis. "Who is he?" My voice was steady, but inside, I was already screaming. My mother's face didn't just fall, it collapsed. For the first time in my life, I watched her struggle for words, her mouth opening and closing, her hands tightening into fists against the arms of the chair as if she could physically hold on to the last shreds of whatever lie she had prepared. "You don't understand," she finally muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." I laughed then, a cold, hollow sound that felt foreign even to me. "Oh, I think it's exactly what I think," I snapped, my patience gone, my fury sharpened into something lethal. "I think you've been using my money to support your lover, and I think Dad has known about it this entire time." I expected denial, anger, the usual deflections, the rehearsed lies, the desperate attempts to gaslight me into questioning my own reality. But what I didn't expect was silence. My mother didn't deny it. And worse, my father didn't look surprised. That was what did it. That was the moment the final piece clicked into place, the last shattering blow that left nothing but the raw, ugly truth in its wake. He had known. He had known, and he had let it happen. He had allowed my money to fund her affair, had sat there and let me break myself trying to support them while she lavished gifts and security on another man. The betrayal was a living, breathing thing inside me, something I could feel clawing at my ribs, making it impossible to breathe. "How long?" I whispered, the words barely making it past my lips. "How long have you been using me like this?" My father sighed, long and slow, as if he were the one who had been wronged, as if he were the victim in this twisted, disgusting reality I had just uncovered. "Ryan," he said, and for the first time, I could hear it in his voice, the exhaustion, the careful resignation of someone who had already accepted his own guilt. "We didn't have a choice." I actually felt myself laugh, a sharp, bitter laugh that cut through the room like glass shattering against concrete. "No," I said, shaking my head as I took a step back, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of the truth. "You had a choice. You chose to lie to me. You chose to use me." My voice trembled with rage, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "You chose to betray me." My mother's expression shifted again, her calm facade cracking as she opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Don't even try to justify this. You've been living a lie, and I've been the one paying for it. I sacrificed my own life for you, and you've been spending my money on someone else." The words poured out of me, fueled by a mix of anger and disbelief. "How could you do this to me?" The silence that followed was deafening. My father shifted uncomfortably, and my mother's eyes darted between us, searching for a way I felt like I was suffocating inside the house I had grown up in. "You had a choice. You just chose this. You chose to betray me, to use me, to lie to me for 10 years. You had a choice every single day, and every single day you made the wrong one." My mother looked away, but my father didn't. And that was when I knew they weren't sorry. They weren't ashamed. They weren't even particularly shocked that I had found out because, in their minds, this had always been my role, the provider, the doormat, the son who would never say no. I felt something inside me break, and then I smiled. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm, my hand steady as I took my phone back and slipped it into my pocket. "I am an adult, and I just made a very adult decision. I turned and walked out the door without looking back. I already knew what I had to do next. I don't remember driving home that night. I don't remember walking into my apartment or setting down my keys. I don't remember anything except the cold, steady certainty that settled deep inside me, something sharp and unforgiving that refused to be ignored. I had spent 10 years giving them everything I had, breaking myself to keep them comfortable, sacrificing my own happiness so they could live without worry. And in return, they had drained me dry and discarded me like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing, not anymore. I wasn't their puppet, their bank account, their fool. And for the first time in my life, I was about to make sure they felt it. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started with the simplest, most immediate step. I canceled everything. Every automatic payment, every standing transfer, every bill that had my name attached to it. I pulled up their accounts, the ones they had made me a secondary on for convenience. And with a few clicks, I severed the financial lifeline they had come to depend on for the past decade. It was shockingly easy, almost too easy, to undo years of blind generosity in mere minutes, to watch their account shrink to nothing as my money stopped flowing in. I imagined them waking up the next morning, expecting their bills to be covered as usual, only to find that there was no money left, no cushion to fall back on, no safety net to catch them. Because I was the safety net, and I had just cut the rope. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. I went deeper, following the trail of deception they had left behind, tracking every questionable expense, every unexplained withdrawal, every shady transaction that had seemed insignificant at the time but now stood out like flashing neon signs. That's when I found it, my mother's secret bank account. The one she had been using to fund her affair. The one she had hidden under layers of lies. The one she thought I would never find. But I did find it, and I knew exactly what to do with it. A few quick searches told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't just been stealing from me, she had been cheating the government too. Years of unreported income, hidden transactions, a carefully constructed paper trail designed to keep the IRS from noticing. But I noticed, and so would they. It only took a single anonymous report, a neatly compiled set of documents attached to an email, a few paragraphs outlining years of undeclared income and financial misconduct. I hit send and sat back, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of 10 years start to lift from my shoulders. But I still wasn't done. Stephen Carter, the man who had unknowingly lived off my money, the man whose luxury lifestyle had been funded by my sacrifice, the man who had no idea that every gift, every dinner, every expensive trip had been stolen from a son who had never questioned why his parents always needed more. I found his social media first, a carefully curated collection of smiling photos, lavish vacations, diamond jewelry, and designer clothes. All of it proof of the life my mother had given him. My life, my money, my stolen years. I took a breath, opened my messages, and started typing. Hi Stephen, I think you should know the truth about where all that money has been coming from. I attached the records, the transactions, the proof of every dollar my mother had funneled into his account while her own son struggled, while her own son gave up everything to make sure she never had to. I didn't add anything else, I didn't need to. And then, just for good measure, I made one final call to my parents' landlord. I had covered their rent for years without a second thought, had assumed they were struggling like they always claimed, had believed every sob story about how they were barely scraping by. But now, looking at the records, I saw the truth. My finger hovered over the delete button, assuming it was another attempt to reach me, another flying monkey sent to guilt me into coming back to the fold. But something made me open it. Mr. Ryan, my name is Marcus Wilson. I'm a social worker with Adult Protective Services. I'm contacting you regarding your parents, who are currently facing eviction from their apartment. They've been referred to our agency due to their age and apparent inability to care for themselves financially. Before proceeding with state assistance, we attempt to contact any family members who might be able to help. Could we schedule a time to speak about your parents' situation? I stared at the screen for a long time, emotions warring inside me, anger, guilt, vindication, and something else I couldn't quite identify. I typed 3 different responses and deleted them all before finally sending a brief reply agreeing to a phone call the next day. When my phone rang at the appointed time, I answered it with my heart in my throat. Mr. Ryan? Marcus Wilson from APS. Yes, I'm here. There was a rustling of papers. Thank you for speaking with me. I've been assigned to your parents' case. They're facing eviction at the end of the month, and from what I can tell, they have no financial resources or plan in place. Your father listed you as their only family contact. Of course he did. I took a deep breath. I haven't spoken to my parents in 6 months. I see. His voice remained neutral, professional. May I ask why? I hesitated, then decided on honesty. For 10 years, I financially supported them completely. When I lost my job and asked for help, they refused. I later discovered they had been lying about their financial situation and using my money to fund luxury purchases. I paused, swallowing hard. An extramarital affair. There was silence on the other end of the line. I appreciate your candor. This context helps explain the situation. What exactly is their situation now? I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. They're 3 months behind on rent. Utilities have been shut off twice and reconnected through emergency assistance programs. Your mother has been diagnosed with depression, and your father has applied for disability benefits but was denied. They have no income beyond Social Security. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the image of my parents sitting in a dark apartment, no electricity, no water. Despite everything they'd done, some part of me still cared, and I hated that part of myself for it. What happens to them if they're evicted? I asked. Without family support, they would likely enter the shelter system temporarily while we help them apply for subsidized housing. The waiting lists are long, though. It could be months or even years. I thanked Marcus for the information and told him I needed time to think. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table for hours, staring at nothing, turning the situation over in my mind. They had stolen 10 years of my life. They had lied, manipulated, and used me. They deserved whatever happened to them, didn't they? 3 days later, I found myself sitting in a small coffee shop, watching the door. When they walked in, my parents, I almost didn't recognize them. My father looked smaller somehow, hunched in gray. My mother's face was gaunt, the designer clothes replaced by a worn sweater and jeans that hung off her frame. They spotted me, and for a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, hesitantly, they approached my table. Ryan, my father said, his voice rough. Thank you for, sit down, I cut him off. I'm not here for reconciliation. I'm here to make you an offer. They sat, exchanging glances. I found you an apartment, I said flatly. It's a small 1-bedroom in a building for seniors. The rent is reasonable, and I've paid the security deposit and first month. I've also set up automatic payments for basic utilities. My mother reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled back. This isn't forgiveness, I continued. This is me acknowledging that, despite everything, I don't want you homeless. The apartment is furnished with basics. You'll need to find a way to pay for food and anything else yourselves. Ryan, my mother began, tears in her eyes. We've made terrible mistakes. I'm not interested in apologies, I interrupted. They're 10 years too late. This is a one-time offer. Take it or don't. My father nodded slowly. We'll take it, he said quietly. I slid an envelope across the table with the address and keys. The lease is in your names. What you do with it is up to you. I won't be checking in. I stood to leave, but my father's voice stopped me.